Hello everybody, a warm welcome to my talk here at Adobe, at the Adobe stage at the NEC Photography Show. Thank you for coming. I hope you've all had a really amazing time here over the last few days. A warm welcome to everyone watching online as well. I hope you find this talk useful. It's going to be about developing your own style and visual narrative in photography and how you can do that for yourself. So I'm actually going to start with a recent video I created with Adobe about using Lightroom CC, so I hope you enjoy.
The next stop is Canary
So we've actually created 3 of these videos for you guys to check out, and I'll be sharing a link on my Instagram later. I hope you enjoy them. But yeah, we're going to jump straight in. So for some of you that don't know what I do, I'm basically a commercial photographer. I shoot commercial content for brands such as Adidas and Nike, and I create visual content for them. Similarly, I do a lot of work in social media. I used to work for the @London Instagram team, and everything from running campaigns to managing campaigns to working with influencers globally. So we're going to jump straight in and talk about finding your style. So I like to I like to split it up into 2 different categories. Now, finding your style is based on 2 things. So you've got a shooting style and you have an editing style. And it's very important to work on both of those different sections. So I'm going to jump in and talk about shooting first and foremost, because I think this is the most important way to start. So the way I found my personal style or my visual signature was actually looking at my past and looking at my past influences. Now, some of you know already, but some of you don't. I actually used to be a musician, and I used to play the trumpet. By the time I was about 16 years old, I'd achieved my grade 8, and what that allowed me to do was to travel internationally and play with orchestras, jazz bands, and different ensembles. Now, what was happening was I was seeing these amazing places, and I needed to document it somehow. At the time, I only had my smartphone, and so that was my tool. And I began capturing and sharing online on Instagram. Since then, yeah, it's been, well, history, really. So that's inspired me. You need to find out what has inspired you, and you need to work out how that affects you creatively. So travel was a massive thing for me, and initially it became, my work became very heavily landscape-based and nature-based. So I would take long walks on my own, and what this allowed me to do was it gave me the headspace to really work out what I was doing with my photography, learn about the settings, learn about aperture, learn about using light, and learning about scouting as well. And all these elements, actually, I use in my work today. So I would highly recommend, if you are trying to find your style, go out and shoot for yourself. Don't be too influenced by the other people around you. Really work out what resonates with you. I also found out that I liked dark, moody, atmospheric, but beautiful imagery. And this was something I didn't realize until recently, and it was when I was looking back in my past, I understood why. And I think fundamentally it came from music, and a lot of the stuff I used to love playing was jazz and blues and very sad but emotional music and evocative music, and I think that's what's influenced my photography today. And so I just want to show you a few of the landscapes that I've been taking over the few years. And I hope what you can see is that it all has a similar aesthetic. There's a lot of fog, there's a lot of atmosphere, there's a lot of mood. These were taken in Snowdonia and Wales. Very beautiful. I'd recommend going there. Again, I always try to keep a consistent body of work over my images, even if they're in different places. And that takes years of practice. So for those of you who are landscape photographers or you're looking to shoot more landscapes, here are a few tips that I've jotted down for you. So wake up early. Waking up early is a really important thing to do for a number of different reasons. One is light. So I love to shoot in landscapes at sunrise, It hurts to wake up, but it's definitely worth doing. The light at that time is the best, and it's the most complementary to the landscape. Do your research. So I always research the locations I go to before I actually go and shoot them when I'm shooting landscapes, because you need to make sure you're there at the right time, especially if you're shooting sunrises. You don't want to turn up and find that the hike to the location is another 2 hours away and you've missed the sunrise. Take your time. So this is really important. Take your time, work out your settings on your camera, learn how changing the different elements of that are going to affect your photo, and play around with it and experiment, have fun with it. Use the rule of thirds. I'm sure a lot of you know what that is already, but for those who don't, it's a composition technique whereby you have grids set up on your screen, which look effectively like noughts and crosses. And so it's basically 2 vertical lines going down and 2 vertical lines going horizontal. And what you want to do is to have the horizon or interesting elements either on the lines or at the intersecting points of the lines as well. And lastly, expose for the highlights. So I've had to learn the hard way, and when I've overexposed an image, I found that highlights are not retainable. Once they're blown out, they're gone. So I always tend to shoot under one stop, just to make sure I've got those highlights, and then I can bring up the shadows, which are a lot more lenient when you're playing with them. So learning those fundamentals, I then went back to my hometown, my home city of London, and I tried to implement what I learned on my own in nature and traveling, and use that in cityscape settings. And so I tried to keep the same aesthetic, which was dark, moody, atmospheric imagery. And I think that's where my style really came from. It gave me a body of work and a visual signature that I was proud of. And so I think when I was scouting for locations landscape-wise as well, I would try and find the odd routes or the weird places to get to these locations so that I wouldn't miss out anything that's hidden on the way. And so I try and do that when I'm shooting in cities as well. One thing I like to do is when I'm shooting in cityscape settings, I like to compose my shot and then wait for somebody or wait for the right subject to fall into place. And instead of running around chasing after your subject, compose yourself, get yourself ready, have everything set up, all your settings ready, and wait for the person to walk in, just like the person on the right. And so I hope you can see there's a common theme with, across my body of work, across landscape and cityscape so far. So here's some cityscape tips for you guys who shoot cityscapes. Shoot in the golden hours and the twilight hours. For those who don't know what that is, the golden hours are basically an hour after sunrise or an hour before sunset. And that's when you get this lovely golden glow that gives you long, long shadows on your subjects. It's very flattering, very complimentary to your subjects. So always try and shoot within those times. Twilight hour, for those who don't know that as well, is just after sunset. So maybe about the first 30 minutes. It's often called blue hour as well. But what I really love about this is that it's when the city lights start turning on. So you get a nice mixture between the city lights and also the sun and the colors that have just happened in the sky. And you've probably seen it in some of my work already, but that's my favorite time to shoot. As I said before, compose creatively and then wait for your subject to walk into frame. Go off the beaten path. Don't just take the direct routes. Make sure you're exploring all your surroundings and making sure you're taking the dark and weird alleyways up to wherever you're going. Just make sure you're exploring. Bad weather makes for good photos, and I'm an advocate of that. As you can see, a lot of my foggy images are taken at around 6, 7 a.m. in the morning where nobody's around. Sometimes it's raining. It's horrible, but at the same time, that's when you get really evocative imagery. So don't shy away from bad weather. Always keep your wits about you. Obviously, when you're in a city, there are dangers all around you, so make sure you're keeping aware, especially when you're carrying expensive gear. Make sure you've got eyes behind the back of your head, basically. And imitation isn't a form of flattery. This is one I've seen quite a lot, especially with Instagram. A lot of people do like to shoot the same locations, which is not a problem. However, make sure what you're doing is unique and you're shooting it in your own personal way. So what I'd realized was that although I shot landscapes and cityscapes, some of the clients I wanted to work with were portrait-based or needed to be able to shoot people. So people like Adidas and shooting lookbooks, I needed to be able to shoot people. And so I began working on my portraiture. Now, the way I like to think about it is similar to landscapes and cityscapes. I've already got my surroundings, I've got my composition ready, and all I've done is incorporated somebody into the frame. And I like to think about it that way. Also, I love taking photos, street photography. It's definitely challenging and it's very hard, especially when you want to take a portrait of somebody that you don't know. My advice is the worst thing they can say is no. They very rarely get angry, so it's always worth asking. Sometimes it's great to get candid photos to get that get that relaxed expression, but don't shy away from asking somebody for their photo. Just make sure you say why. So I think some of you have heard this story before, but I was on commission for Unilad in New Orleans, and this is where this image was taken. And this is exactly what I did. So I saw this gentleman, and I thought, damn, he looks cool. So I went and spoke to him, and I said, hey, like, can I take your portrait? I love your attire. And he said, yeah, but you've got to give me $10. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. So I gave him $10, and we had a little photo shoot, which was really fun, really amazing. Unfortunately, the next day, I turned on the news, and who do I see? This gentleman. He'd been convicted for a murder he committed in 1973. So that's the last image of him, basically. Yeah, interesting. So yeah, guys who shoot portraits, these are my tips. So 60% conversation, 40% photography. So I truly believe that you need to engage with your model or your subject and make sure you understand what makes them tick. Make sure that they're comfortable, and that's how you're really going to get the best expressions from them. Make sure your focus is always on the eyes. That will ensure that, well, the eyes are the windows to the soul. So you need to make sure that the eyes are sharp and in focus. Otherwise, it doesn't have the same effect. Incorporate movement to your images to add it a bit more drama, and to make it a bit more exciting. Play with different angles. Don't be afraid to shoot above. Don't be afraid to shoot below. Really experiment, play around. Understand and use light. So if you see some harsh light or you see some light coming through some blinds, play around with it and interact with it. It makes it very interesting. And lastly, when you're shooting against a surface, make sure the subject takes a step forward. And now what that allows you to do is it makes it a bit more flattering and you get a bit more bokeh in the back, as you can see here. Just make sure that they take a step forward. So with all these elements, I decided it was time to move to professional work. And knowing the fundamentals and having the fundamentals nailed allowed me to then work with brands that I admired, really. And I felt comfortable enough to shoot content that they would be proud of, and I would be proud of similarly. So a lot of the work I do is for tourism boards. As you can see, I shoot a lot of nature, landscape, and cityscape, which lends itself to tourism boards. And so I've shot in Hamburg, Copenhagen. Again, this is all about scouting and finding places. Shot in Monaco, Barcelona. I mean, I'm sure you can still see there's a similar aesthetic there. There's a similar vibe. These were taken in Paris for Eurostar. Croatia. Again, New Orleans. I think one thing I want to say as well is that, so this was actually taken in a district called the 9th Ward in New Orleans, and some of you know about Hurricane Katrina. This is where it hit the hardest, and still to this day it looks like this. I mean, this was about just under a year ago, and you really need to be aware of your surroundings when you are shooting these places, because what people don't see is just to the left of this, there were a family who were crying because their homes have been damaged. So you have to be very sensitive sometimes when you're shooting these kind of things. I do abandoned places as well, but that's for another story. So some of my work for Adidas, again, just incorporating elements. So I've still got the nice foggy, moody imagery that I have in all of the rest of my work, but I've just applied it to portraiture and to commercial work. So as you can see, I work a lot with sneaker brands, which is quite fun. So I'll also shoot lookbooks. Lookbooks are really fun to shoot. They do take quite a while, and you have to make sure that everything is clean, which can be tricky sometimes when you're shooting in difficult situations, but it's good fun. I'll definitely advise anyone to go for it. So these were shot for Hype Beasts, a streetwear publication online. This was for Nike, shot Mo Farah, which was great fun. And on the right, I've shot a lot of Fashion Week stuff as well. But I've been commissioned by magazines to shoot behind the scenes at Fashion Week just because I still incorporate that moody element, and I like to play with light and I like to play with movement. And I think they've seen that in my work, and they've said, look, backstage is dynamic, it's fast-paced, but they think I can handle it, which is cool. Peroni, I've shot for a lot of alcohol brands as well. Again, it's the same things. I've just played around with movement, played around with lighting, and I've just applied it to a different scenario. Music events as well. So these were shot for Red Bull. Right, so as you can see, that is about shooting. That's all about taking photos, and I think you need to nail that first before you can then work on your editing style. Because if you're shooting things that aren't consistent, or if you're shooting things that are completely different, your editing is not going to make them consistent. It just doesn't work like that. But once you have nailed that to a T, this is when editing is really important as well. So take time and create. I know, well, a lot of you have full-time jobs. It's not, you can't do the same as me, which was when I was about 20 years old, I would just sit at home and edit for hours. Some people don't have that luxury of the time. So, but I think on a weekend or after work, do take that time just to sit down and start editing a photo from scratch. Yes, you can use presets like Visco, you can use online tools, but I really, really advocate just sitting down and edit from top to bottom and starting from scratch. Go through all of the Adobe Lightroom features. So again, start from the top, from exposure, contrast, white balance, and just keep going down and play around with the tone curves. Tone curves are often things that, well, it gets overlooked. You really do need to play with the red, the blue, and the green channels. You have to play with all of it in order to get your own visual style. Creating virtual copies is something I do all the time. Some of you know about it, some who don't. Effectively what it is whilst you're in Lightroom, you right-click and you click Create Virtual Copy. And what that does is it duplicates your image without creating any more, well, without taking up any more space, and you can then edit it again. Now, what you can do is you can then compare the two edits together and see which one you like best. So I do that all the time. I highly recommend doing that. So yeah, once you've edited an image and you're comfortable and you're happy with the style that you've got, create it as a preset and save it as a preset. You can then apply it to other images, but it's not a one-stop shop. It doesn't work for all of your images. So you need to go ahead and tweak and adapt all of them, well, most of the settings, just to make sure that it works with that image. Obviously, you've shot at different times of the day, different lighting, so you're going to need to tweak them. It's not going to, yeah, you can't just paste it and it'll work perfectly. So once you're working with this over time, make subtle changes to your preset. So sometimes, previously, I used to love adding a lot of clarity, but as my influences have changed and as I've seen a bit more work, I've realized using a lot of clarity is not always good, especially when you're shooting portraits. And so I've decreased the clarity and then I've saved that as a new preset. And this process has gone over 5-6 years now, and it's taken me this long to actually end up with a style that I'm happy with. So it doesn't happen quickly, but just make sure you are learning, you are adapting your presets as you grow as a photographer. Research online. There's an abundance of tools online for learning techniques, editing tools. Some of those are Adobe coffee breaks, really, really good. When you've got a quick break at lunchtime, literally about a minute, you can learn a new technique. Really, really simple. I highly recommend those. YouTube, there's an abundance of stuff on there. Check it out. And Skillshare is also great as well. I use that. There are a lot of workshops and tools online that you can use. Brilliant. And yeah, never stop learning. Never stop learning. I'm still learning to this day. I haven't mastered it at all, not by any means, but I'm still learning. And finally, be true to yourself. Editing is really about your self-expression, and so you need to convey that when you're editing. So be inspired by others, well, other photographers, but don't just copy their style. I see a lot of people that try, well, they see something they like and they try and copy it setting for setting, or they want to just buy their presets and use it, but they're not really expressing themselves. Well, yeah, they're not expressing themselves. So yeah, take your time, learn what you love, and then execute. And yeah, creating a visual signature does take years of practice, but if you don't start now, you're going to miss out. So I recommend starting ASAP. And lastly, have fun. Photography's fun. It's great. So yeah, to summarize all of this, nail down your visual signature first and work out what influences you creatively. So look at your past, look at what resonates with you when you're taking photos. That's fundamental to learning where you want to take your photography, in my opinion. Carry on practice shooting what resonates with you, and then make your weaknesses your strengths. So portraiture was a big weakness for me, but over the years I've been practicing and practicing, and now I love shooting portraits. So don't just leave them to the side. Definitely take them on head on. Take time to work on your editing process. Again, set aside an hour or 2 hours a day, and just really work out what you like editing. Learn different things online. Save presets and then tweak them. Over time, your style will develop organically. It naturally does. For every single photographer I know, they started off one way and gradually their style has changed. But as long as you're making little changes, you will have a consistent style across the whole body of your work. Never stop learning, and don't just copy others. Make sure that you are really trying to express yourself creatively. Make sure you are putting your vision down. And practice. I know we all hate hearing that, but practice really does make perfect. Well, near perfect. You can't be perfect. And so yeah, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope that's been insightful, and thank you for tuning in and watching.